Good morning, everyone, and welcome to St. Luke's Sunday Forum. It is a Sunday unlike any other that we've had together as interim rector and people, in that we, this past week, had that very traumatic experience of a violent mob invading the sacred halls of Congress. And I am deeply, deeply grateful that we have arranged to have as our conversational guest today, the Bishop of Atlanta, Robert Wright. And the original plan was for him and me to talk about Dr. King and Kingian principles and how they've impacted him, and we'll still get to that. But thank God we have his wisdom and faith and also leadership with which we can have a conversation first about the trauma to our democracy this past week. So without further ado, welcome, Bishop Wright. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Ed. Always good to be with you. We've been conversation partners for a long time. I'm always glad about it.
Same here, my friend. Very moving. So if you don't mind, talk a little bit about how yesterday afternoon and evening and this morning, I do want to say we're videoing this on Friday to be played on Sunday, so we don't have to do all that reconstruction of time. Right. So how was yesterday for you?
Like a lot of Americans and even world citizens, I mean, it was shocking and unbelievable and embarrassing and hurtful and lots of things. I'm still processing how I feel. In addition to my own feelings, I was watching some of what was going on with two of my children that are home, one 15-year-old and one 20-year-old, and them watching the police's response to folks, which looked very different to them from the responses that they watched the police give in the summer. And so they noted that disparity, and that was heartbreaking for me to watch them and to hear them talk about that pain. And so, like a lot of people, I'm trying to make sense of it all.
I think that it truly was an epiphany of what is the status of the soul, heart, and body of the United States of America. And when you talk about what it manifests, before or in the context of God being manifest, we do have to note that systemic racism is being manifest. And in my homily, I said it's really important for us to understand that had this been a Black Lives Matter gathering, that the response would have been much more rapid and much more violent. And I think that all of us need to sit with that. And those of us who are not of people of color, and those of us who don't have children who are people of color, need to acknowledge that we are in this thing together.
There's no doubt about it. I look at it like something's wrong when you treat nonviolent protesters as insurrectionists, and you treat insurrectionists as nonviolent protesters. Something's wrong. And I think that's what we saw. We saw law enforcement, and I'm a big supporter of good law enforcement. I affirm good law enforcement every chance I get. But we saw something that was curious. We saw people being taken, selfies being taken with people. We saw people use restraint. We saw law enforcement with their backs up against the walls, but yet they did not unholster their weapons the way they do in other places. We saw people get away with a lot yesterday that, the last 10 unarmed Black people got killed for a lot less than what we saw yesterday.
Indeed.
And so it is curious. It is curious. And we talk about yesterday being the Feast of the Epiphany, the great unveiling, revealing. And so what did we see? We saw this messy business of nationhood, right? Out of one side of our view, we saw the first Jew and the first African American win Senate elections. And then we saw out of the other side of our gaze, we saw people climbing over walls in our Capitol, trying to replace the flag with flags of the name of one person. And so it's dizzying. It's the slow work of beloved community. It requires faith, I think, and spiritual depth to even begin to try to process this.
I want to ask you to reflect on another thing that struck me yesterday. I am, and this is not to get us into our conversation about Dr. King yet, although I want to reference him right now.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, the New York Times carried an obituary of one of the men who helped save Dr. King when he was stabbed with a penknife by a lady with mental problems in a bookstore early in his career. And he, rather than coming down on her, talked about the climate in which we were living in 1964, I think it was, or maybe 63. It may have been earlier than that. And he mentioned the climate of violence and hatred that is real, that can infect a person. And I carry in my heart understanding that as a profound truth. And it also resonates with Ralph McGill's Pulitzer Prize winning column when the temple was bombed. And he said that we must put this at the feet of those who created, again, a climate of violence and hatred and bigotry. And the climate in which we can make a contribution to in terms of violence or nonviolence is real. Could you speak to that, Bishop?
Well, I think this is why Jesus is still important. Jesus is still relevant. Jesus is still a real world aid for us, because somehow Jesus helps us to thread the needle between giving voice to disparity and injustice and inequity, and at the same time blessing those who curse us, praying for those who despitefully use us. He keeps us alongside lots of different kinds of people. I think we as people of faith need to remember and acknowledge we come from a Hebraic tradition where words matter, because words float on the breath of life, and we speak things into existence. And so I was able to reach out to a friend of mine who was connected to one of the senators who was bringing some objection. And I was saying to him as kindly as I could, you don't get to be an arsonist for 4 years and then try to behave like a firefighter on the day that this thing happens.
Indeed.
And so quite definitely, not only our politicians, but a lot of us have to repent for the climate that we've created, where we have used contempt against people. We have canceled people. We have done all those things. And now we have this very brittle, very reactive, very hateful climate. And I think it's going to require, especially from the community that says they follow Jesus, it's going to require us to go back to our basics. And our basics are, yes, we need to speak up boldly and loudly for the value of human dignity in all forms and in everybody. And we need to talk about inequity and justice. We need to talk about all of those ideas, neighborliness, but a particular way in which we need to talk about those things, because words matter. And now look what we have created. We've incited this, we've spurred this on, and this is what we've got. The chickens have come home to roost in a manner of speaking. That's what we saw yesterday. Indeed.
I think it's the book of the letter of James that talks about how powerful the tongue is.
The tongue is, yeah.
And we've been at St. Luke's working with both the Carter Center and a center at Princeton, and also Cure Violence Global, an organization that really has focused in on the uptick of militia activity in Georgia, and that Atlanta was a hotspot through our election, and thank God for a peaceful election here in Georgia. But they were making the point that violence is infectious.
Yeah.
And you can have, I think one of the things that's really, really clear in the epiphany of yesterday is leadership matters, and a leader can stir up people to violence.
Leadership matters, tone matters. I think if we really believe that others have dignity, which is beyond disagreement, that matters. How we live that out, all of that matters. Again, we're going to talk about King at some point, but I think this is one of the things that King did. He showed us in August of 1963 that if you can just turn a phrase which can grab hold of the imagination, you can provide energy to sustain people. And that's the I have a dream, and that sustain people to try to achieve that dream, right? And the converse is also true. If we can paint a picture which captures our imagination and plays to our deepest fears and anxieties, that also provides an energy which can be destructive. And we're seeing that. And I think we also have to name, we're talking about fear. We're talking about fear. It's interesting when in Charlottesville, when people marched, they didn't say necessarily first and foremost, we hate Jews, we hate blacks, or whatever, whatever pejoratives. They said, you will not replace us. So there's a segment of our community that is really worried that diversity means replacement. And celebrating diversity means replacement. And that's a deep and abiding fear. And people are leveraging that fear to create what we're seeing right now.
That I'm taking a note here on that. Diversity means replacement. That is the fear. And I want us just to keep that in mind, because we have that as our headwind.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And I want now to kind of shift and talk about the backwinds we have.
Yeah.
Or
Thank God for the tailwinds, right?
Thank God for the tailwinds, and the power that is within you is greater than the one in the world.
Absolutely.
As a way of getting to that, and that means we're going to be talking about Dr. King in just a second. There are just two beats, interim beats, I want to sound before we get there. Mm-hmm. And they both have to do with extending gratitude to you, Bishop. I have been observing and you and Alicia and your staff, and have been in most of the meetings and have been trying to embody those wonderful protocols that you have been expressing and sending to us in consultation with great leaders at Emory Hospital and CDC. And it has been an awful lot of work. And I simply wanted to express my gratitude to you and Alicia and the other staff members and your advisors for keeping us responsible for the human family, and that self-care is other care. I just wanted you to receive that gratitude from me on behalf of the people of St. Luke's.
I really do appreciate that, Ed. As you can imagine, I've got emails to the contrary over the last series of months, but to be sure, we've had to ask people to do hard things, in service to neighbor, to community, and to world. And if the people who follow Jesus can't find a fuel to do that, then who can? And so I have to tell you, by and large, I'm so pleased that the partnership that I have has been extended to me across the diocese at St. Luke's and beyond in this hard thing. It's a thing that nobody wanted to do, but we have to do it. And so I say, if we do the things we have to do now, perhaps we can have the spring that we want to have. And so I'm grateful also to you and to St. Luke's and others who have decided to sort of, really sort of belly up and push alongside of me, because I think we'll be fine, but we've got to stay together, and we've got to do those things that are going to accrue, a big benefit to our community. We don't want the hospital system overrun, right? I mean, hospitalizations are up 39% in the state of Georgia, right? We don't want to put those folks at risk. We don't want to put others at risk. And so we're going to do our part. We're going to be neighborly. It makes no sense on Sunday to celebrate Jesus's conversation about neighborliness and then miss opportunities to be a real neighbor now. So we're keeping as I like to say, we're keeping our mind and our behind in line. And I think if we do that long enough, it'll benefit all of us.
Yeah, I heartily agree. it's been hard to swallow, and it's been important to swallow.
Very
It's
hard.
been hard to live, and it's been important to live.
Yeah.
And my wife and I spent Thanksgiving by ourselves without children,
Yeah.
Christmas by ourselves without children, New Year's Eve by ourselves without children. We're coming up on our 50th wedding anniversary next month,
Wow.
and we're
Wow.
doing it without children
Yeah.
because we believe you and Dr. Fauci that we've got some really, really bleak months
Yeah.
before we're able to get into the light of the vaccinations.
It's true. And let me just say this. First of all, congratulations in advance to you and Hope on 50 years. What a wonderful, gracious, lovely accomplishment. Congratulations to you for that.
Thank
But
you.
let me also say that, you know, the data that we're using, factoring into our decision making, really is part and parcel of what it means to be an Anglican,
Yes.
right? You know, we're talking about scripture, tradition, and reason, right? The good Lord has given us good minds, and that means good science to use. And that's the way God is alongside us and the way God is helping us, right? So this is not magic. God has given us good brain and good intellect and good research, good data. So that's what we're doing. We're really being Anglicans,
Yeah.
right? We're using scripture and tradition and reason, science to make our way forward. And so we're going back and going deep into who we actually are.
Great point. I hadn't even thought about that, but that is so true. Wonderful. There's one more comparatively minor point, but it's a very important point. And that is, I just want to thank you for the active guidance and leadership. I don't know anything about it, the content, but I feel it through talking with our search committee that you are exerting and investing in our finding a great leader for St. Luke's Church as the next rector. So thank you also for that work you're doing.
Absolutely. No, I mean, the Diocese of Atlanta needs a great St. Luke's, and a great St. Luke's, I think, needs the Diocese of Atlanta. We're partners in the work that we're doing. And so I'm trying to support Greg Vaughn and others as St. Luke's makes this important call. Look, I'm a little bit biased. Don't tell everybody, but I'm a little bit biased. St. Luke's was the first congregation that I was a part of outside of my home congregation in Washington, D.C. when I came to St. Luke's and did CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education, in 1996. And so we really want to get your call right. And Ed, let me just also say thank you for the energy you've brought to St. Luke's. I think the highest praise that I can tell you that I hear is St. Luke's feels like herself. She's excited. She's energetic. She knows she wants to swing for the fences. She wants to continue to make a difference in the life of the city, right? And so I think that's high praise for you and for the members, and especially the vestry of the congregation. So well done. Well done.
Thank you. Well, I'm really chomping at the bits to talk about Dr. King. So the idea that I have here is that we're spending 2 Sundays talking specifically about Dr. King, although Dr. King and Thomas Merton wind up in almost every sermon I ever preach. They're my spiritual fathers.
Sure.
But this is the terrain I'd like to cover with you. And that is, I'd love to hear, and you can mix it up and we can come back and go deeper, but I'd love to know about your relationship with Dr. King's values and his life. I'd love to know if there's a ritual you go through every year about Dr. King's time. Are there particular books or sermons that you revisit? They certainly are the case with me, and I'll share that. And then, which of the King principles? You know, the website says, you know, there's 6 Kingian principles, and and we're going to unpack those actually with members of Ebenezer next Sunday.
Yeah, well done. Yeah,
it's lived out in their life.
Yeah,
I'm interested in which of those principles do you kind of feel pulsing in your heart and soul all the time as a leader, and also for 2021. So go anywhere you want, Rob.
Wow.
And back. But
good Lord.
Who he is, what you read ritually every year time. Okay.
Yeah. So I do I send out a meditation every Friday. I hope your folks subscribe. It's called For Faith. And so on the Friday of Dr. King's actual birthday, which is the 15th, the meditation that's going to come out it's entitled Hello, Darling, which is an excerpt from a letter that he wrote his wife, Coretta, in October of 1960. And I sent that out, and I'm sending that out to people because my ritual is to try to find something of his writing and something of his speaking that I was previously unfamiliar with, so that I don't get stuck, right, in this sort of one-dimensional character. And I got to tell you, I'm so touched by this personal letter, this affectionate letter from a man to his wife, a man to his spouse, in 1960, because it's right here in Atlanta. Coretta is pregnant with their third child. He's got two little kids at home, and he's going off from DeKalb County to a jail in South Georgia for 4 months. And he's saying to his wife, in as much as he's asserting it, he's questioning it. He's saying, I think this is the right thing to do. I think this is what sacrifice demands. I think this is what following Jesus demands. And I need you to be strong, Coretta. And if you're strong, I can be strong. And so why I chose that is it helps me to get a glimpse into someone that we're really tempted to make some sort of spiritual icon and put him up on a shelf. It humanizes him. It gives him flesh and bones. He's a husband. He's a father. He has his doubts. He isn't sure all the time that the steps that he's taking are the best steps. He loves this country. He loves the state of Georgia. He wants to do the best he can. And so I love finding bits and pieces that help me get to understand him a little bit, because I think we do some violence unintentionally to Dr. King and to his memory. We want to make him some sort of spiritual super elite athlete and put him on a shelf somewhere. And we put him out of reach for us. He becomes no real good to us. But I think when we keep him close to us, when we let him be a flawed human being, when we let him be someone who fails in Albany, Georgia, who fails in Cicero, Illinois, who fails in Chicago, if we let him be that, we let him be a strategist, a thinker, a prayer, someone who's afraid, someone who is steeled in his spine by his wife's encouraging words, if we let him be all of that, then he helps us to be real flesh and blood Christians now. If we just stay with the soaring eloquence and sort of rhetoric, he becomes larger than life and no real good to us. And so that's part of a ritual. As to literature, I read lots of things. The two things that I go back to that become fresh to me every time I read them is his very first speech when he gets to Montgomery at the Holt, H-O-L-T, Street Baptist Church. You ought to read that. He has about 15 minutes to put together a speech where he's addressing really the formal beginning of the bus boycott in Montgomery. And he does such an amazing job, this very young, not quite PhD, he hasn't finished his dissertation. And he really characterizes everything in that speech. And he lives out of that speech as he goes forward. So the Holt Street Baptist Church speech, you can listen to it audio or you can read it. But he realizes that what you and I have is the time that we have right now. Right? So be faithful right now. What does fidelity require right now? And that we need to do it together. We need to make the move together. And he has this sense of time that if you and I can do what fidelity requires now, we will set the right kind of example for those who follow us. They will look on our example and say, these folks met the moment then, we can meet our moment now. He's a steward of his time. And then, of course, the old standard is the letter from the Birmingham jail. And as far as I'm concerned, that should be the 67th book of the Bible. And every time I read it, something else falls open. Every time I read it, something new comes to my imagination. And so this last time I read it, he uses the word 10 times, disappointment. He uses the word disappointment 10 times. And he said his disappointment is primarily directed at the upper middle class church, white and black alike, who have become so self-satisfied that the edges come off of them. Their buildings are muscular, he says, but their flesh and blood commitment is anemic. And so I think a lot about that. He says at that time that if we don't get back to the self-sacrificing model of Christianity, then we'll become an irrelevant club, and we will not be worthy of young people's interest and participation. And he said that in 63. And it has in some ways been something that we need to continue to touch and let us be directed by. And so those are the two pieces there. I'll let you respond to that, then we can get to some other places. But those two things, but the Whole Street Baptist Church, I heartily commend it. And of course, Stanford has compiled all of his papers from a young man to his late papers. And I really, if you can look over my right shoulder, you'll see a series of red books there. Yep. Those are those books. They're thick. It's great reading to see his development.
Yeah.
He never thought he would become what we now know of Martin Luther King. He thought he would become a pastor of a fine church like St. Luke's, or a fine church like the Riverside Church up in New York, or he thought he would be the president of Howard University or something like that. In fact, people tried to ask him to be that again and again and again. He turned it down. He turned those opportunities down cold and stayed close to the work that we now know him for and are grateful for.
And that his corpus is before age 39. I mean,
it's crazy. It's just crazy. It's crazy.
That young a brain was producing so much.
Well, the fourth generation, right? I mean, he's a fourth generation cleric in his family.
Right.
I mean, so, what were dinner time conversations like at home? I mean, it's probably like the stuff of seminary classes. I mean, he's listening to Dad talk. And of course, Daddy King was a force of nature here in Atlanta in terms of lobbying for our first African-American police and firefighters, and supporting our African-American teachers and trying to make inroads there. And so he grew up watching Dad live out his Christianity, and Mom, in a particular way.
Yeah. Yeah. My story is much about this, being a son of South Georgia.
Yeah.
And going to Mercer in Macon, and there a cabal of Baptist preachers who knew Dr. King, worked with Dr. King, introducing me to Dr. King's thinking. And then, Lord of mercy, on my way home from something, I've forgotten what, when I was, it was just before he was killed. He and I were at the same, Dr. King and I were at the same luggage carol, getting our luggage, and he had his entourage with him. And I got him to, I asked him to give me an autograph. And so I just loved that, I got to shake his hand and that kind of stuff. But all of this is in preface to go into to Daddy King. So Daddy King was a really important force in my life, because after the funeral, a group of us were in Atlanta, a group of us who were working on integration issues in Macon, were in Atlanta, and we, our mentor, Joe Hendricks, took us to dinner with Daddy King. And he kind of enlisted us in the movement. And he said, just because you're white doesn't mean that you can't be in the movement. And then he taught us 2 or 3 of the songs that were important for him to sing. So Daddy King has been important to me along the line as well. And we're going to put citations, links to the Holt Street Baptist Church speech, and also to the Birmingham jail letter. And let me just mention 2 other pieces that have been important to me over the years. One is the Why Vietnam speech that he gave in Riverside Church. That so many liberal, progressive, both persons and media outlets critiqued him for, and he was right on target. I mean, history has proven him to be absolutely right to bring up the trinity of evil, and racism, war, and materialism, or commercialism, or however you want to put it. And then that final book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos and Community. We will quote from that book as a passage of scripture read in the liturgy on Martin Luther King Sunday. So we'll put all of these things on, and anything else that occurs to you, Bishop, about our adding to things that people really ought to read.
Yeah, I'll think about that and send you some other links. I think that I think the other thing we don't celebrate in Dr. King enough is that we sort of say, well, he's a eloquent Black preacher, sort of want to put parentheses around him. but he was a first-class intellect.
Oh,
I mean, this is a man who's trained in the classics. This is a man who gets through Morehouse College as a youngster, younger than most freshmen, like a hot knife through butter. This is a man with an amazing ability of recall, whole pages of literature, Thoreau, and I mean, my God, I mean, a first-class intellectual. And you know, again, we have to credit Daddy King and Mother King, who wanted him to be grounded in a great Morehouse education, but wanted him to go north and spend some time in the academy in the north. So to bring back some new sort of information, data, balance, ideas, and link that up to the movement here in the South. And so I want to celebrate that as well. First-class intellect.
And you're reminding me of another person who at Morehouse read the entire library at Morehouse, Dr. Thurman.
Dr. Thurman, sure. King's mentor. You know,
yeah. And then Dr. King chose him to be his spiritual director. And
that's right.
So
that's right. And King just wanted to be Thurman, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the funny thing about it. Like King carries Thurman's book around,
yeah,
you know, for the rest of his life. You know, Jesus and the Disinherited. And so again, I like the quality of Dr. King's life that I like is that life keeps happening to him.
Yeah.
And he keeps meeting it with faith. He's not a sort of bundled superior spiritual athlete. Again, I want to say that. He's a guy who says, what does faith require today? Right? And he's someone who failed pretty dramatically in a couple of really, you know, instances, you know, that we don't cover very much. But I mean, he was someone who was engaged in leadership across generations, you know, with a clear eye of what progress meant. And progress meant that we all make progress, not just me and mine, but us.
So that touches into one of the core values, issues, ideas that we could call Kingian. So as a person who leads, as a person who follows Jesus, what do you live with from Dr. King? What's living inside your soul and mind?
Well, what lives inside my soul and mind is also something that's sustaining me in my journey right now as I look at footage of our Capitol. And that is what I believe is that nonviolence is on the side of justice, and the universe is on the side of justice. And so Dr. King wrote this wonderful phrase, and he used it a couple of different ways. He said that justice is love rebelling against everything that is not love. So justice is love rebelling against everything that is not love. And so what Dr. King walked around with, and it got confirmed for him, especially in the dark days, even in the dark days, it was what held him in the dark days. We're talking about the little girls dying, you know, in Birmingham and other heinous things, many of his friends being killed, is that in addition to what I'm seeing with my eyes, and in addition to what I'm reading in the news, still God is alive, God is not dead, and God will have God's justice and love will win. And today, it didn't look like that, but overarchingly, that trajectory, justice will have, and love will have the final say. And so get on the right side now, get on the side of justice and love. And so that's one of those Kingian principles, because without that, you can't have hope. If you don't know now you're on the winning team, if you're on the team of justice and love, then what will hold you when you have days like yesterday? What will hold you when despair seems like the only appropriate response? So we have this otherworldly hope. And really, it's hope that has us, if we're honest. Hope has us, and hope got a hold of Dr. King. He talks about this at that famous conversation that he had at his coffee table. When I went to Dexter Avenue Baptist Church with my family some years ago, I really just only wanted to see not just the church, but I wanted to see that kitchen table. Because it's at the kitchen table where he realized that he himself, not son, not husband, not leader of movement, not even pastor, but he, Martin, had to call on the God that he heard his parents talk about. And somehow he hears, he says, Martin Luther King, stand up for justice, stand up for righteousness, and I'll be with you even to the end of the ages. And so justice, nonviolence is on the side of justice, and the universe is on the side of justice. Jesus is obviously on the side of justice, and I want to be on the side of all of that. So I think that's the principle that sustains me. For that, though, you're going to have to take the long view.
Let's breathe that in now.
That's a whole lot.
Let's breathe that in, because that is not only momentous and transformative, but that's at the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
When you have that faith that you will never be left alone, and what that energy is that will never leave you alone is that justice is going to win and prevail, that love is going to win and prevail, and that the universe is a moral universe. And it really does have an arc to it.
If it doesn't, then we're wasting our time, Ed. Maybe you and I, particularly as clerics, are wasting our time. We're pulling off some kind of cutesy mass delusion. If love is not the most durable chemical element in the universe, then we're just placating people, right? But if love is the most durable, the most catalytic chemical in the universe, then we're right. We're right every day of the week, and we're right twice on Sunday, right? We're right about it. And so this is one of the things I liked about Dr. King. You know, if you watch the evolution of his preaching about love, it deepens and it thickens, right? He's clearer and clearer and clearer that that's the only way forward. And it's not the sentiment that we know. It's not the churchified sentiment. You know, it's not being nice, as we Southerners know only how to be nice, right? It's not that. It is this, that's why I like that quote. It is this thing that is active in the universe that is rebelling against everything that is not love. And it will have its way. Misogyny will fail, homophobism will fail, racism will fail, injustice, inequity, all of it will fail. It will crumble under its own weight. But the only thing left standing on that day, right, because we're on a journey, will be love. Albert Einstein said it beautifully, didn't it? He said, I'm convinced that the mind of the universe is benevolent. This is what we fasten ourselves to. If we're not fastened to this, I don't know what can hold us in a pandemic, in a racial reckoning, in an insurrection, in a siege, in the failure of politicians. If that doesn't hold us, my gosh.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I had a little radio show for Oprah Winfrey for a while, and I had a guest, and I said, you know, what keeps you going? And he said, I deeply believe that the universe is kind.
Yeah.
And he said, what a naive, crazy thing to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dr. King was saying that.
Yep.
Einstein was saying that.
Yeah.
All the great Tutu.
Yeah.
I believe that the universe is moral.
That's right. How do you stare down, you know, the seething racist who wants your blood? I mean, how do you see that person as neighbor if you don't realize that somehow you both come from the same God? I mean, and the truth of the matter is, and Bishop Curry does a good job in making this clear, the truth of the matter is the only progress we've ever really made as human beings, you know, as it regards moral advancement, has been somebody decided to love when it was unfashionable to love.
Yeah.
That's the only progress. That's why you and I get to be family in the Deep South right now.
That's right.
Because some men and some women, some blacks, some whites, some rich, some poor, said, I'm committed to this Jesus more than I'm committed to social standing and status quo.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh, that's important. These are points you're making, Bishop, that really call for deep breathing, that we need to sit with this stuff. We're not talking just churchy
No,
pious platitudes here.
no.
I mean, Jim Lawson, who I got to be friends with in Los Angeles, and I've had him here as a guest.
Yeah.
I'll never forget one time when I was at Vanderbilt, and I went to a rally in Nashville at which he was speaking, and he talked about these motorcycle gang kids who started taunting him,
Mm-hmm.
and because of the color of his skin, and he came over to them, and he had it within him because of his training to say, could you tell me about it, that motorcycle? Is that a TX24? That is, and all of a sudden, they were talking human to human instead of skin color versus skin color.
Yeah.
And that ability to train your heart, and that is something we need to talk about. Dr. King was not sending kids into protests in Birmingham without deep spiritual training. This was a sacrament. Protests were sacraments for him. And to have that, now that person who is pouring ketchup on your head, putting a cigarette butt out on your head, is you. Oh,
you know, I'm glad you brought that up, because someone else that needs to be read on the way to thinking about Dr. King is Ella Baker.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about spiritual practice, spiritual discipline, you want to talk about mother's wit and a tenacity to make America live up to our founding ideas, and our Christian practice live up to its high ideas. It's Ella Baker. And Ella Baker was suspicious of charismatic leaders because she believed in the power of the individual. And so she's the person who trained a lot of Black and white young people and sent them south to live out their Christianity and their faith in that way. So you ought to familiarize yourself with Ella Baker. She's a mother, really, of the civil rights movement. I would also say that I tell you who I'm missing this year. I'm missing C.T. Vivian. I got to be friends with C.T. Vivian, he and Ambassador Young. And I tell you what helps some of these high sounding ideas that you and I are batting back and forth, Ed. What makes them real is when you meet the genuine article.
Yeah.
When you meet the people who got punched in the face and knocked down flights of stairs and decided to love and not hate. When you meet them, when you have a cup of coffee with them, and you realize that for them, these extraordinary feats were just like moving and breathing, and they weren't better than any of us. They had just decided to love. Dr. King says that. He says that I've just decided to love because the burden of hate is just too much to bear. And so, you know, I think Jesus is saying it in his own way too, is that, you know, we've got to decide to love. I've got to decide to love more than I want to be right. I've got to decide to love more than I want sort of me and mine to succeed over you and yours. I mean, this, I think, is the refining and the refreshing part of our faith. It's supposed to be like water on a rock, our faith and our prayer book and our sacraments and our liturgy. It's supposed to be getting us down to these three things we've got to give up. If you want to be serious about walking with Jesus, you got to give up three things. You got to give up smallness, you got to give up separateness, and you got to give up superiority. Those three things in all their forms.
Wow.
You got to give them up. And when you give those things up, or if you just pledge to and try to, because none of us are perfect, all fall short. But if you, that's the journey, that's the work, and nobody gets there all entirely. But if you're going to be serious about walking with Jesus, decide, right, to love, you're going to see that the smallness is going to have to burn away, and the superiority is going to have to burn away, and the separateness is going to have to burn away. And that ends up being the work. And so the church, in her best expression, is just keeping people, you know, sort of face to that fishbowl, that this is who we are, and here's the spiritual nourishment to get it done. But let us be clear, that's what it is. That's what it is. Dr. King does that. His friends try to do that. And then, of course, when you do that, here's a great indicator of doing that. You're able to sit side by side with men and women of other faith expressions as brother and sister. he does that. It's not about denominationalism at that point. It's about brothers and sisters trying to create beloved community. So he's great friends with Rabbi Abraham Heschel. He had a lot more conversations with Malcolm X than we are aware of, that were not contentious, that were not about technique, that were about who God is and how do we make America live up to her promises. And so he finds himself beside lots of different kinds of people. And that's an indicator of a real grown-up spirituality, that you find yourself beside people who may believe differently, but you are, sort of got your shoulders on the gospel wheel, so to speak, on the love wheel, and you're pushing that forward.
Amen, 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 amen. Now, before we leave, we have to talk. You may want to talk about some other things, which we'll squeeze in. But the question that comes into my Bapto-Episcopal heart, and I mentioned Bapto because there's a sweet mysticism that's in the Baptist Church. It's distortion, however, amongst several distortions, frankly, is that you're alone and that you have to do this alone. And there's this hyper individuality. And the beautiful thing about the Anglican tradition, which I would die for, is that it focuses on community, communion of saints. And you can't be a Christian alone, according to Desmond Tutu. So I want to you, please, sir, talk about giving up smallness, separateness, and superiority, and understanding that I have to have others with whom to do that.
Well, and that's separate. I need somebody to help me do all of that, right? I mean, I cannot describe for you what my back looks like, right? So I need somebody to help me see my back, right? So I know that some of my biggest struggles in my own spiritual journey have been finding the courage to be vulnerable, to be with people. And so for me, at least, separateness is not necessarily I was trying to be exclusive. It was just I was trying to be self-contained.
Yes.
And that, I think, puts an unnecessarily low ceiling on the height of our devotion.
Yeah.
So I can't do it. God has organized the universe that I can't know God in God's fullness without being alongside you. And neither can you know God in God's fullness. All right. So I mean, I think that, so the what is it? It's the height of our adoration, gets played out in the length of our oblation, right? Yeah. So, and my oblation means not only will I serve you, God, and take care of the poor, but am I willing to subscribe to your pathway, your direction? And that direction is think of it. Jesus is Lord of Lords, King of Kings, and Jesus came to be alongside. Could have sat in God's heaven, stayed in what I call the original gated community, heaven. Could have stayed right there and just sort of sent us a fax or a video or whatever, but came alongside and decided to be God in a particular way. And so then in so doing, you and I are given sort of the breadcrumbs about how to move into the fullness of what it means to be human. And that is, I just cannot do it by myself. You've been married almost 50 years. I've been married about half of that. And I can tell you that I know things now about myself and my wife and about life. And I think about God because of delivery system, spiritual formation that happens in marriage that never occurred to me when I said I do at the altar.
Right.
It's only in the living, in proximity. Brian Stevenson talks about this all the time. It's proximity.
Yeah.
It's the proximity. And so this is God's delivery system to us. And he didn't send a memo, he sent a son. And I think what a gracious invitation, what a privilege that you and I get to sort of try to add a verse to that. And try to, follow along in that. I think what we can't be, and I think Dr. King's life proves this out, is we can't be God affiliated.
Right.
We have to be God followers.
Yeah.
I think we want to be God affiliated. We want to be the crowd in the Gospels rather than those who actually took up their mat and walked with Jesus. And so I think if Dr. King is of any real use to us now, he demonstrates for us the power that can get released in the world, in the local community, if you and I would decide to go a half step more courageous, a half step more faithful, a half step more loving. And I think that's why he continues to animate our imaginations, because he is a man, as a boy, a little Georgian, little Atlantan, did it. And, you know, as I said some time ago, it's amazing that that little parish church downtown taught the Bible stories to that little young man. And that little young man got out there with other little young ladies and other young men, and they changed the world. And so the local parish really is the hope of the world.
Yeah.
If we teach the stories and tell them the truth about life and tell them that they love, they have dignity and worth, and so does everybody else, my God, what a wonderful sort of way to shoot rockets out into the world that help us be who we're supposed to be.
Yeah, you're reminding me of something I wanted to say and forgot to say when you were talking about the search process for St. Luke's. The Episcopal Church needs healthy parishes. The Diocese of Atlanta needs healthy parishes.
Yes.
I think the world needs healthy faith communities.
It does.
And that's what I want for St. Luke's, is it to be this vibrant, audacious, visionary, courageous faith community, because the world needs that. And little boys and girls are being brought up in that. And who knows what God is planning for them to do.
That's right. But they got to get a clear message, you know, cross above flag.
Yeah.
And cross above fear.
Yes.
If we give them that message, love above all, if we give them that message, you know, this world for your grandchildren and my children and someday grandchildren, you know, we've passed on something to them.
Yeah.
And I think this still remains the hope of the world.
Right.
Still, even with all of the despair-inducing stuff that we see, this still is the hope of the world.
No doubt, no doubt, no doubt, no doubt. Well, I'm taking home a whole bunch of stuff from today.
Ed, you know, I love to talk to you, man.
I love talking with you. Now, is there anything that I didn't ask you that I ought to ask you?
No, I think we ought to let the folks breathe. That's quite an exchange to behold. No, I'm so glad that you did it. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I send my love and well wishes to St. Luke's and to the St. Luke's universe. And, you know, when this all passes, we will meet again. We will. And we may, right now, we have on the books that you're going to be confirming in the park in sometime in May, I think. So we're busy at getting ready for that. Because I will be there. I'm hoping that we can gather outside before we'll be able finally to gather inside. Yes. You're a blessing to us, Rob. Thank you, Bishop Wright. This has been a wonderful, sacred moment. You're a gift to us, and blessings, blessings, blessings. Thank you, Ed. Thanks very much. And thank you all for being with us. It was great to have you. Join us next Sunday when we celebrate Martin Luther King Sunday with marvelous guests then too. Have a great week.